Hello and welcome to this HYROX R.A.M.P course. I'm Piers Plowman, Education Manager for the HYROX 365 Academy and part of the Education and Research team at STIXITS. Today, you're going to embark on an exciting journey through the evolving landscape of athletic preparation as we dive into the HYROX R.A.M.P protocol, a highly specialized warm-up system crafted specifically for the demands of the HYROX competition and training. The field of sports science is only just scratching the surface when it comes to understanding athleticism and human development in the context of warm-ups. We're only looking at the tip of the iceberg. At HYROX and STIXITS, we recognized the need to go deeper. We asked ourselves, what's missing within HYROX performance? How can we give every athlete the chance to optimize their warm-up and movement preparation in a way that supports both peak racing performance and long-term athlete development? That's why we came together to create the world's first educational program within an established sport that's specifically designed to move the sport forward through better preparation, training methodology, and race day readiness. To help us do that, we are incredibly honored to welcome a guest who has helped shape the very foundation of modern warm-up theory, Professor Ian Jeffries. Professor Jeffries is a globally respected figure in the world of strength and conditioning. His work has shaped both academic and practical approaches to athlete development around the globe. He is best known as the original creator of the R.A.M.P warm-up protocol, a structured, evidence-based framework that has transformed preparation strategies in elite sport. Professor Jeffries' methodology is now widely adopted by professional teams, Olympic programs, and high-performance environments worldwide. With over 30 years of experience, he has worked as a performance coach, academic, and consultant across rugby, football, athletics, and combat sports. He's a founding fellow and former vice president of the UK Strength and Conditioning Association, as well as board member of the Chair of Education and Professional Standards, and current president of the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Also joining us today is Ralph Wentz, sports scientist and head of HYROX 365 brand and performance, and the founder of STIXITS and the training methodology Phonetics. In a previous time, Ralph competed internationally for the German athletics track and field team, which then also transitions to the professional baseball career. His innovations today have introduced three-dimensional movement solutions based on rotational force integration that are now being embedded into the HYROX R.A.M.P standards to prepare athletes for the requirements of the race. In this curriculum episode, we're going to explore the evolution of the R.A.M.P concept, from its scientific roots to its cutting-edge application in competition and training. We'll examine how HYROX is adopting and expanding the protocol, incorporating the next generation tool like Phonetics to fill in the gaps left by the traditional warm-up models.
Welcome, Ralph Wentz and Professor Ian Jeffries to the podcast. I would like to start off by exploring both of your journeys. So perhaps Ian, if you could start us off with your background in sport, strength and conditioning.
Certainly, it's challenge to the memory, I guess. It's a long journey. It started ultimately, as so many do. I was that kid who was fascinated by sport, loved playing all sorts of sport, and then got to probably the age of 16 where you have to start to make those decisions. Loved my football, loved my rugby. Which one was going to be the one I took? I took the rugby journey for my sins. And in that, I realized I wasn't quite big enough. I wasn't quite fast enough. And that started my journey into strength and conditioning. My journey into how can I get faster? How can I prepare myself for rugby as the game was changing? And at that same age I was given, man next door was moving, and I think he probably didn't want to take everything with him, and he found a rusty old weight training set in his shed, and he thought, rather than take it with me, I'll give it to that kid next door. So I had this fascination, I had this weight set, and that started probably a journey into strength, what ultimately proved to be strength and conditioning. I had no idea what that was at that point. But what I found through trial and error was it made me faster, it made me stronger, And it busted many of the myths that were being thrown at me at that time. I remember my uncle, oh, God rest his soul, was the national rugby coach for a long time. And I remember him telling me, it'll slow you down. No rugby players are doing this. So I had to fight all those misconceptions. And one of the beauties of rugby at that time, and one of the things that people find strange, is that even at the top level, rugby in the early 80s was amateur, which meant that we have to have jobs. So I was already teaching, already coaching, as I was still playing. And I think those have enabled me to triangulate on training. So I've experienced it as an athlete, I've experienced it as a coach of team sports as well as strength and conditioning, and then also have that academic background where I can look at the theoretical aspect of it. And since that journey, I've taught, I've coached, and fortunate at the moment to be president of the National Strength and Conditioning Association, the
Bravo.
first president from outside the US. So that, in a nutshell, is my kind of journey from sports into strength and conditioning.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Ralph, if I could invite you also to share your side.
Yeah,
your background.
I love to. I think mainly we start out at the same foundation, right? It's always this fascination with sport when you're a kid. That was with me. I couldn't really decide what sport to do. I was into track because I think one of my primary school teachers was a track coach, actually, and she said, "Oh, you're good. Come with me." So I started track, but I did like any sport you can imagine they were throwing at me because it was such a fun thing. It was social. It was all your friends were there. I think that's what the main perspective I took. Actually, my friends did it, right? So, he played tennis. I go and play tennis with him. Of course, we started playing tennis when Boris Becker won Wimbledon, which is now 40 years ago or something like that. Yeah, it's amazing how old we are now. But that's when we started playing tennis, and we had one of the premier ice hockey teams in Germany, in Düsseldorf, right? And Düsseldorf Bremenstraße was the iconic place to go to and watch an ice hockey game. So we were running around with these sticks, and so you started playing ice hockey, and you did that and that and that. So that was my youth, actually, right? All the sports besides school and a little bit of music, but it was fun, right? It was being active, and for me it was clear that I wanted to study sports science from the get-go. My mother always said, "Oh, your grandfather was into banks and stuff like that. He was a banker. You have to go." And I said, no, I want to study sports. And to be honest, it's amazing that your parents allow that, right? That is, they say, well, do what you love, because only what you love you can be good at. And I truly believe that, actually. I truly believe that. I think we are in a field, probably made our hobby into a job, right? And I don't know if it's with you, but I feel like that I don't work, really. It's like my passion to do that. So I studied sports science and actually journalism as well. And I went into broadcasting very quickly.
Wow.
Was an analyst for Second German Television, ZDF, for track and field, which of course I knew so many people in. That was of course very helpful. But I did all the sports for a short time and worked for a couple of television stations. Always envisioned myself being a commentator or something like that at the big events, of course, as I didn't make the big events as an athlete, right? I thought I had the perspective, but it didn't transition from the youth into the adulthood. And yeah, afterwards, always stayed true to sport. Always did sports. Always trained. But actually went in a totally different direction. I want to go that route, but I went into communication and advertising and stuff like that. And actually, the corona, the pandemic, brought us all back to thinking about what we want to do. And it brought me back to sport and how to train. And that's when I started to think about, is that what we do in strength and conditioning, if that's the right term, I don't know. But is that the right way as we move as humans? And so I started to develop a new or brought back an old knowledge into a new form, into a training methodology, which I call phonetics, and developed tools with it that are called the STIXITS. And I actually presented that to Christian Tötzke, the CEO of HYROX, already 3 years ago, and said, what you do, I think it's really, really valuable, because you bring people into movement, you give them a perspective, you give them purpose for training. But I think what you do is mostly 1 or 2 dimensional, and you're missing the rotational part. Why don't we put our training philosophies together, and we will have truly one of the best sports probably you can do? And he back then said, yeah, I like your idea. I like your mindset. I think it's a long way to get that into fitness, what you're doing. But I like your creativity, and I would need somebody to start HYROX 365, which was then back then called HYROX 360, because it was the all-around new view on training and fitness. We called it later HYROX 365, and Piers, you have it on your T-shirt, so it's not that old, but it's already very, very successful at the B2B branch. And and that's how I got to HYROX. And from HYROX, we moved on, and now we're trying to get, and that's why we're here for, trying to get our tools and our idea of movement into HYROX, into progressing athleticism and developing athleticism as a holistic point of view. And I think that's the beauty of HYROX, that we can do it there because it's such a young sport, and we don't have all the biases that come with an old tradition sport. Yeah, that's actually my way into training and conditioning.
Thank you. Well, I think it's very clear that we've got some real wealth of knowledge, experience and pedigree in the field of sport. So I think the listeners are in for a real treat today. So I want to bring the conversation now towards why we're here. We all know that a warm-up is a universally accepted intervention prior to exercise, but no one's really added true value and structure to it. And Ian, I'd like to start off by asking you, how did you come to the insight that the warm-up offers an opportunity to really become an effective tool for preparation?
I guess the key term there is necessity. It was something that in my various experiences I needed to do. And I think that can be something that drives innovation. So if I look back into my background, going into the dark days before conditioning was necessarily accepted in rugby, our warm-ups were so suboptimal. Quite often we would be inside, we wouldn't even go outside. Now, I was also trying to do some track work. I wasn't great, but I knew it was something I loved doing. And there was such a disconnect from the way the track athletes were warming up and the way the team athletes were warming up. So I can remember in the early days of my rugby career actually going out onto the field. I was one of the few players who did that and undertook my own warm-up because I knew I needed something different than what the team was doing. Now, ironically, as the team warm-up started to evolve, it looked more structured, but I never felt optimally prepared. They would do a lot of technical, a lot of tactical work, but the physical, especially the high-intensity work was often lacking. So I often found myself staying out on the field and doing additional warm-up myself to make sure that I was optimally prepared. Because I had this track background, I knew what optimal preparation for me was. May not have been universal, but what worked for me. So those perspectives stayed with me. Now, as I started to coach, I had very, very different experiences. I'd set up a sports academy that some people say would never work, but it was quite successful. And it was built around strength and conditioning. So we had basically an hour's training every day. So I wanted to make sure that that hour's training was as optimal as it could be. What didn't make sense to me was to use the warm-up as some kind of thing that we had to do. I wanted to say, right, how can I make that as productive as possible? So the ideas were starting to evolve there on the everyday application. The other experience I had at that time was with the National Under-16s rugby team. And that was the complete opposite. rather than having daily interventions, we met once a week. And in the early stages of that, it was that typical thing where the fitness block was at the end of the day, which wasn't ideal for anybody because the athletes knew at that point that the rugby had finished. They just had to do this extra 20 minutes or so with the fitness coach. And those were traditionally endurance sessions. Now, when you've already got high levels of fatigue, additional endurance of a low quality is not going to give you a lot of benefit. So what I negotiated with the coaches was, okay, rather than give me the last 20 minutes, can you give me the first 20 minutes? And ironically, the coaches loved that because it allowed them to plan their structure for the main session. But what I found was in that 20 minutes or so, I took a long-term approach. What can I teach? What can I develop? So we had, yes, there was a certain amount of repetition, but I could work on skills that I felt were crucial for rugby. The ability to accelerate, the ability to decelerate, the ability to change direction, the ability to start developing the stretch, shorten cycle, and so on. And what we saw was the impact that had. So these experiences are condensing in my mind. And then what they became, slowly but surely, was the R.A.M.P protocol. Now,
How long was that process till you found out that it worked?
I guess instinctively with myself, it was quite short.
Okay.
Because I knew what worked for me. And I was one of those strange rugby players at that point. I tried to get as much data as I possibly could, so I could see these processes in the short term working, but also these processes in the longer term working. So, I've got the data back home. I was a much faster rugby player in my early 30s than I was when I was 18.
Wow.
And that was a different trajectory to what most players were going on, whose career tended to be a decline in speed. So I knew I was doing something that was different. And the warm-up was a key part of that.
Can I just ask, because this story is quite remarkable, and it raises the important issue about biases and how lots of teams and programs worldwide will have biases towards warm-ups and views. Could you elaborate on what you've seen over your career that has enabled you also to have a point of difference?
Yes, history and tradition are a very powerful tool.
Oh, sure they are.
They're very powerful influence for the good, but also they can be a hindrance, because once you've traditionally done something in a certain way, you tend to repeat that. I think because there was so little sports science around. So I'm talking about when this is starting, this is the very early 80s. It's probably before the surge in sports science. So Ralph, you said earlier that you knew you wanted to study sports science. I didn't, because I didn't know what sports science was.
Okay.
I didn't know it existed. So I remember leaving school, and my only options if I wanted to go a sports route was to become a PE teacher. And at that point, I didn't really think I wanted to fix on that, because there was a decision at 18 that you meant that was the one route. So I actually did the generic geography degree. But during that time, my rugby career was telling me, no, this isn't for you. Sport is. So then I did a teacher training, which combined geography with physical education. And that probably was the start of me moving in that sport direction.
Coming back to the biases that you touched on, if you bring something new into a sport, which you did, and you made the coaches of the under-16 national rugby team give you 20 minutes and change it from the back to the front, so you must have been very persuasive. But what were the arguments that you came up with? What were what kind of biases you had to deal with and what arguments did you take to get around them?
I think I was very lucky. One, they were very receptive to ideas. And secondly, none of them wanted to do the warm-up. It was one of those, and I could sense it in the first couple of sessions. Would be, oh, it's your turn to do the warm up. Oh, is it? So that was an opportunity for me. That was, do you mind if I do it? Yeah. But I think the key was communication. It was communicating the value of what we were doing specifically to the game. So say we'd been working on direction change, and an athlete used that in one of the exercises, one of the scrimmages, etc. what we had. I would emphasize that. I said, that's what we've been practicing. And once I was able to highlight the benefits, the coaches bought in. But the key was it was benefiting the rugby. It was benefiting what they were trying to develop. So I think the key message then is we're not two different teams. We're part of the same team. We're just using different skills to come up with the same result, which is better players.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable point, is that we need to bring those two entities together.
Just one question. Did they know from the get-go where you wanted to go with the warm-up? Because
No,
no,
probably not. They'd seen some of the work I was doing in the late part of the session, and that I was probably different in that my emphasis wasn't on work for work's sake. It was where possible productive work that would lead to multiple benefits. So I've always been obsessed with speed. I always believe that if you move well, it facilitates so many different things. So rather than endure poor quality work, my philosophy has always been, let's get the quality right first, and then let's add the sustainability of that into the equation.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying we're going to go into a lot of depth about movement quality in this podcast, but that will come later. Before we go into R.A.M.P, what I would like to maybe just kind of finish this part of the podcast on is, could you, Ian, potentially describe and explain the shift between what has happened with the traditional warm-up and what creates a transformational one that touches on athlete development?
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to what I was just talking about. In both my daily sessions and with the work I was doing once a week with the national team, the warm-up, yes, it was preparation for the upcoming session. But I always felt it needed to be more than that. It was an opportunity. It's training time. As I've often said, if you imagine you warm up 15 minutes today, 15 minutes tomorrow, 15 minutes the next day, that's a huge amount of accumulated time. And one of the challenges people were always giving me was, I'd like to be able to do that, but I don't have the time. And what I was finding out was, without a huge increase in time allocation, I could get a great deal of quality training input, but it required me to think differently. So rather than just the general to specific warm-up protocols that were out there at the moment, which the term general always worried me, because it was very much, well, it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you get the physiological responses. But once we started to think about, okay, can we get those same physiological responses through structured activities that bring not just short-term benefit, but longer-term benefit? That, to me, was the transformational part of it. So we could teach people to run, we could teach people to jump, we could teach people to land, we could teach people plyometric exercises, we could teach people different movement patterns, all in structured warm-ups. So yes, we still focus on the short-term benefits, but the transformational part is the long-term planning. It always surprises me that the warm-up, and I think it's changing, but wasn't planned as meticulously as the main session. It would, just be a few scribbled notes. Okay, we warm, then the main session started. That to me was just a missed opportunity.
Do you think there's a difference between an individual warm-up and the team warm-up? Because you refer mostly to rugby, and rugby is, of course, you train all these movements with the team and stuff like that. So there is limited time for probably conditioning and athleticism. But in an individual part, like I come from track, of course you train in a team environment, but it's of course you train always individually. So it's very much focused, but still I think we did a pretty much structured warm up. But at the end, it was always the same thing somehow to get ready to do the main thing. So it was not really leading up to it. Of course, it looked different when you threw the javelin or when you did sprints, but still, it was not that we thought about what effect does it have in 2 years' time.
Exactly. A lot of the things that came into the R.A.M.P system were intuitively from sports such as weightlifting, track and field. So what I was finding was that there was very little focus on the intensity of activities. Track athletes would find that amazing. That prior to a game, footballers, rugby players may not have done a flat out sprint. Track athletes would just look in amazement at that. And it was making sure that we touched all of the bases. So yes, there's a difference. And as you say, Ralph, team sports have to integrate so much more. But I still think through effective planning, we can make sure that the athletes are optimally prepared for the upcoming game, but also focusing on the longer term development as well.
Mm-hmm. You talk just one thing before we go on. You touch the point. You talk about the warm up, but if you go more into specific detail, you talk about the preparation. Do you really like the term warm up?
Warm up. I mean, we're stuck with it, aren't we? In so many instances in sport and training, we use terms because we've always used the terms.
Yeah.
No, is warm up right? Yes, there is a temperature related element to it, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
Preparation is probably a better term because we are preparing, but then does that suggest a shorter term focus? So we're preparing not just for what's coming up, we're preparing for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 months, 2 years in advance. But yes, the words that we use impact what we do without a doubt.
Yeah, it's all about language, right? And
yes.
The warm up, I think, implements that. We just do this thing that we raise heart rate and we raise body temperature.
That's right.
And when we've done that, we're ready to go, right? This is what we are talking about. And if we change the language, it might have a different effect. That's why I like, with a term like R.A.M.P, you already have, you don't even like, that's R.A.M.P.
That's it. We're essentially ramping up in preparation for what's coming.
Yeah.
I think this is an important moment for coaches listening now, that we're really emphasizing that the warm-up is not just something to prepare for the immediate that's going to happen next, the training session, or whether it's the event, that we're talking about something that is a long-term development of an athlete, and there is an opportunity there. And before we go into R.A.M.P, just one quick anecdote from a separate coach, Dave Allred, who coached the England team and the British and Irish Lions, specifically worked with world-class athletes like Johnny Wilkinson, for example. He believed that the term warm-up was just not enough. It was actually preparation to learn. The athlete, no matter what environment they were in, they were actually going to go into something that they could absorb experience from and build on. But in order to engage in that environment, they had to be ready for it, and their preparation needed to be specific for that. And I think that we will end up sort of unpacking that further within this podcast, but now I think is the appropriate time where coaches are listening to this thinking, I want to know more about R.A.M.P. So let's really dive in. Ian, could you explain what is R.A.M.P, what does it stand for, and each phase's purpose?
Perfect. First up, it is not a method. R.A.M.P is simply a structure. And where it interestingly came from was me condensing all of my experiences, all of my so-called knowledge into something that could be transferable. The reality is the term came from a UK SCA article that I wrote. It was 2007. We were struggling to get an article, and I thought, right, what could I write that might be a little different and benefit to coaches? And I had been doing this warm-up for many years as an athlete, as a coach. I was also, believe it or not, doing a PhD, which was focusing on warm-up. So I had a lot of data at that point. And what I'd seen was this structure that I had. Now, I didn't have a name for it at that point, but the structure was something that could easily be transferred. So when I looked at how a warm-up works, what we instinctively know is that our body at rest is ill-prepared for activity. None of us could get up and sprint. It would be subpar, it would be increase our likelihood of injury. So what we start off with is a period of relatively light activity that raises certain physiological parameters. It either redistributes blood, increases blood oxygen extraction, it reduces viscous resistance within muscles, it increases the speed and the relaxability of muscle fibers. Yep. So those benefits come from that initial movement pattern. What that initial movement does, it raises body temperature, which is key, which allows greater ranges of motion. Once we've achieved those greater ranges of motion, we can then start to add intensity to the activity. So if you think what's happening there, we're raising physiological parameters, we're activating and mobilizing movement, and we're potentiating performance. And as I was writing this article, those phases came, which automatically lent themselves to the acronym R.A.M.P. So what was key with it, I think, was that it didn't come as a theoretical framework. It came out of practical experience. So what I knew was that with that structure, people would be able to come up with many, many different versions that could be varied depending upon their athlete needs at any given time.
Fascinating. That's great insight. Thank you. Ralph, at this point, could I invite you to maybe share from your experience as an athlete, how you could potentially relate to that? Because I know that you're very passionate about how movement quality and how preparation for exercise and sport is important to you. Could you maybe elaborate on your anecdotes on that?
Well, actually, I love that you put a structure to it, because I think you set a standard. And what I like about this structured approach is that it is a standardized thing, but you can put so much content into it, which relates to either the sport or the situation you're in, or the sport and the situation you're in.
Absolutely.
It relates to if you go to a competition and prepare for the competition, or if you go into a structured planning phase of training and you put that in. But you can always relate back to the structure. And that's something that is really fascinating to me, because it gives you guidance. It helps you think about what you do first, second, third, last. And it made me, actually, when I came about it, and it's not that long ago, actually, that I came about it, actually nearly 17 years later than you wrote it, right? so made me rethink of all the warm-ups I have done, or the preparation things I have done in my career. And as I've done so many different sports, of course, I've seen so many different preparations. And as you already mentioned, I think track is a very, very articulate and very well planned way of preparing for something, because you have to be on point. I was a long jumper, and then after one a decathlete, and of course for the long jump you have 3 tries to get to the final 3 jumps, right? So you have to be on point, and of course you refer to team sports, which is a long season. The track is a long season, but you have to peak at 3 times a year to qualify for nationals, to qualify for international and stuff like that. So there is already this structured approach in the planning phase. So to put that into a warm-up to have a long-lasting effect, let me please say that I think it's a genius way of doing it, of thinking about it.
Thank you.
And transforming something that most people thought about as random, just do something.
Yes.
And we've seen that all along, right? I played tennis before, and you hit some balls, right? And if you look now at if you've seen Novak Djokovic warm up at Wimbledon at the age of 38 or something like that. Yeah, he's 38. It's so well orchestrated to be ready to go on that court and perform perform against guys who are nearly 20 years younger than he is, right? And still be up to the task. And I loved him talking about afterwards how much time it takes for him to get to that point to be ready. And that, for me, was the reference to, well, preparation is key.
Absolutely.
Right, and I that was a great story, I thought, and I transitioned afterwards after my track career into playing baseball, actually, which is uncommon for European, but still. So I've been in the U.S. a lot, and I went to school there and stuff like that. So I could throw the javelin nearly 70 meters, so it was natural to go into the throwing things. And there you see a very structured approach. If you're a pitcher, you start warming up, raising, then you start long toss to really get all the joints loose, to really get that to the point where you feel that everything is moving well. You have all these resistant bands you train against, and then you go and throw to your catcher, right? And to get into the movements. It's actually the potentiation phase,
which is R.A.M.P.
Which is R.A.M.P. But
absolutely.
But that's why I loved it, because I could refer back to what I've done. I said, yeah, actually, we worked on this track, but nobody gave it a name.
No. And that's what I was finding. I had this structure which was working, which is what you articulated there with the baseball, but I had nothing to explain it to other people. And then that article actually just condensed those. And when I wrote it, I thought nobody would read it. I thought it would just be one of those throwaway articles. Yet it's surprising where it's been used. I was talking to a few people from Cirque du Soleil at the NSCA conference, and they use a R.A.M.P. warm-up. So its application can be from sport at the lowest level to the highest level, but also across various activities. Anything where there's a physical performance element to it can benefit from this structure. But is it new? Maybe not, because as you said, people have been doing it. What we did was just simply put a structure in place that explained each part, and then it's the thought processes with it. So when I was doing, right, we need to raise our physiological parameters. The question then would be, okay, how? How can I do it that has more benefit than just running around a track or running on the treadmill? And I've got 2 basic parameters that I use. I either look at movement quality or I look at sport skills. So the raising can be achieved through both of those. So you were talking about the baseball players who use skill as a means of doing it. I can also look at themes around movement. So I can start, we can look at various running drills, very light, low amplitude running drills. They're ideal for raising the physiology. But if you think about that, how much practice you can get. If you're doing your low amplitude sprint drills regularly, it's a great learning experience. And that's one of the things with skill, is that it's finding out that it's not necessarily blocked skill practice that is effective. It's more random practice. but also the retrieval of those skills really aids skill development. So rather than just do it all the time, it's, okay, we did that last week. How did I do that? Let's rethink. And it's that simple process of retrieval is a powerful skill development tool. And I think that's one of the differences with the R.A.M.P protocol. And actually my whole concept with game speed is very similar, is that we tend to look from a strength and conditioning background, we're pulled into physiology and biomechanics. Yet movement to me is a skill. It's equally as much a skill as it is physiology. Yeah. So if we only explain through physiology, biomechanics, we miss a key component of performance, which is skill. And if we can put them together, I think we have a more powerful training paradigm.
Mm-hmm. But when you talk about that, and especially skill development, is you have to decode the sport to find out.
Yes, you do.
What kind of skill you need to have a long-lasting effect. Or like I envision, or I experienced that my coaches said, well, to get light-footed and even move better, go to ballet classes. That's what my track coach said, right? And we did that. It felt strange because we were the only guys there, but it was really very, very helpful, actually. But how do you go about, you were in rugby, but how would you go generally about decoding a sport to find out what would be effective to put into R.A.M.P?
That's ultimately the whole crux around my game speed system, which is there are the generics of speed. Acceleration patterns are maximum speed patterns, but those need to be adapted to the game. So I just have a very simple reverse engineering process. But rather than, what I think a lot of people do is they watch a sport and they say, speed helps. And then we jump to the definition of speed and we end up in a very track-based model, which misses much of the nuance of how speed and agility are applied. So I just simply fill in that gap between sport and track, or the generic agility. And what I do, I look at the phases of a game. So if I take football, soccer as an example, we will look at, there's times where the defense and the offense are organized. They're in formation. There are times of transition where one team will win possession and suddenly the teams have to readjust. What I then do is I have a look at, and this is probably the key part, I look at the tasks that the athletes have to be able to do. And they vary, and this is the key, they vary with these different phases of the game. So when a soccer team is trying to break down a low block, there is not a lot of space for them to run into. They have to generate that space. So the maximum speed mechanics are basically useless at that point. Right. They're not going to be used. What we need to be able to do is rapidly accelerate, probably precede that acceleration with some kind of feint, some kind of direction change. Those accelerations are going to come from various stances, various starting positions, various starting movements. And once I've got those tasks of what the athlete are able to do, those break down into very specific capacities, such as I said, changing direction, accelerating from these different movement patterns, and that guides the training. So yes, with that, I have my generic pattern. So is acceleration useful? Of course it is. But if I can then accelerate from these different scenarios in reaction to different stimuli, I start to replicate the requirements of the game. And those movements then can be put into a R.A.M.P warm-up. So if I take the potentiation phase of the warm-up, that to me was what was missing. I was seeing a lot of teams they would do their classic movement prep. They would do raise. They would move through various patterns. They would do their mobility work. But there was nothing that raised the intensity. That to me is an opportunity, because raising intensity allows me to work on movement skills, progressing to
To a plateau.
exactly.
Yeah.
So a typical session could easily be some static or traditional accelerations. Then we could do a couple of rolling accelerations, and then we could do accelerations where I have to feint. I have to beat somebody. Similar theme acceleration, but you see I've moved from generic to highly specific. And that can be phased throughout the training programs. So one of the most powerful tools that I've developed, I think, is the themed potentiation. So we'll have an acceleration theme, we'll have a deceleration theme, we'll have a plyometric theme. And all of those can be periodized over time, so that there is short-term benefit, yes, but long-term benefit. Even in the activation and mobilization section, we have that, whereby it was always mobility was the key, not flexibility. We're not going to develop flexibility in a warm-up.
No.
It's
the wrong time.
Exactly. The logistical challenges are too much. But if you then take something like the functional movement screen, Gray Cook's analysis of movement, squat patterns, lunge patterns, single leg patterns, they form a basis around which we can build mobility. So it's almost also staying steps ahead. So if I want to do squats, say I've got a young team now and I want to do some loaded squats at some point in the future, every warm-up gives me an opportunity to teach the squat pattern, to teach the lunge pattern. I'm no longer teaching it in the weights room. I'm teaching it at every session, so that once they get there, they're optimally prepared. And that, again, shows the value of the longer-term thinking. Similar with activation patterns.
Okay.
What I've always tried to do is to move actively through the range of motion. We're not just throwing our limbs in any fashion, which develops the quality of the motion, but we can also, what you talked about Novak Djokovic there, I've seen a few of his warm-ups. He's doing a lot of band work specific for the shoulder musculature. The activation can be a session in itself, where you can use different tools, different methodologies that either address typical problems within the sport or typical needs within the sport, or if individuals have issues with hip mobilization, glute activation, and so on, you can individualize that part in each and every warm-up, and again, over time, you're going to see quite a benefit.
I think at this stage, what's also really interesting from both of you at this point is two massive things for coaches can take away. The first thing is that it's a learning environment. So
Absolutely.
we need to establish the fact that the warm-up is not there for an athlete to just go through the motions. The athlete needs to engage. The athlete needs to understand that what they are doing is purposeful. There is a purpose to it. There's real value to it. The second thing as well, which as I'm listening, I'm absorbing the fact that the athlete needs to recognize that the warm-up, there should be this kind of natural merging and transition with the main session. It shouldn't be this separate entity. It shouldn't just be something that they do, and then there's this sort of pause, and then automatically they step into the next activity. It should be a really seamless opportunity for them to go, right, I've just taken something from here and I'm going to bring it into my next session. And that's what's going to give me that point of difference, which I think is really powerful, and that's coming through really well. So thank you for sharing both. I am conscious of time, so I want to really get into the next part, which is really, really important. You mentioned skill development. You've also mentioned movement development. And at this point, Ralph, with your expertise in the field of movement and in the field of three-dimensional movement and rotational forces, I'd love for you to explore your journey from the beginning and your long-standing relationship when it comes to three-dimensional movement, rotational forces, many programs and possibly research neglect this element. What are your views on that?
Yeah, I think, Ian, you laid the groundwork very perfectly with your explanation of the themed potentiation, actually, which I really like the term themed potentiation, because it becomes that purposeful thing, right? But you explained how you did it with speed. And you explained actually that everything you did with these guys in speed work were three-dimensional, because that's what they do on the pitch.
Yes.
And that's the difference to the track athletes who go like 100 meters straight, right? So there is so much three-dimensional movement patterns in speed in a thing like in a sport like rugby. So you have to change direction. So what is mind-blowing is like 95% of every movement we do, not only in sports, like every day, is three-dimensional. So only if we get up from a chair or something like that, or from the toilet, or in a situation like that, this is 2 or 1 dimensional. Everything else is 3-dimensional. And if we move in 3 dimensions, there's always a rotational aspect to it, because we turn or we have to react to something. So there's always a rotational aspect to the 3-dimensional movement. So all the athletic movements you described, we talked about tennis, we talk about golf, we talk about people throwing something. Nearly every aspect in athletic is 3-dimensional and has a rotational aspect, but yet we don't train it. So that was something I couldn't understand, actually. And that was something where we started to think about, why is that? And in my training, I always liked that. I always loved, because I was not strong in this sense of being strong like we think. So I probably did 120 on the bench max or something like that, and probably 200 in the squats, which sounds great. But if you see guys in track do like 250, 350,
they're surprisingly strong.
Yeah. But is it strong? What is strength, right? If you look at Carlos Alcaraz, hit 160 km/h forehand. That's strength, that's movement control, that's efficiency, and that's rotational force. If a golfer hits the golf ball, like, how many yards do they hit it? 400 sometimes or something like that. It's like insane what they do in these world championships on long distance hitting. The amount of force they generate to hit the ball is immense. So is that strength? I would say yes, it is. Yeah. Right? It's a lot of strength. You, in your rugby days, you know that there is never a tackle from the front. So what is a squat worth if I have all of a sudden have to rotate and I'm in this unstable position? Because I'm not on both legs simultaneously. Weight distribution is different. The center of mass moves. So my take was on it that as we move in 3-dimensional movement patterns all the time, we always use rotational forces, even if we run straight. If you look on top of a runner, doesn't matter, long distance, sprint, everything turns against each other, right? Everything is about rotational movements. If we look at Frederick Zillen, who is in the level 2 and level 1 education of the HYROX, right, talking about running, it's all about rotation. And the funny thing is that the hip rotates against the shoulder rotation, right? So it's always different. You have to control these rotational forces. So there's an aspect that most people don't talk about, but I think what comes with it, if you start to train it, and there comes the potentiation in it. Rotation be potentiated with the tools in your hand, leaves you with something I call structural stability. And structural stability is the essence, of course, of balance, of movement control, of energy efficiency, of orchestration of movement, and at the end it leads to movement efficiency, which leads to performance enhancement. So it's actually logical progression. But we have to start to train, actually, I think, in 3-dimensional movement patterns with rotational forces instead of just lifting up and down, because that doesn't prepare us for what we do afterwards.
I agree with you. I think one of the dangers in training is we always look for the one perfect method. And invariably, it's effective combination. So do I use bilateral movements? Of course I do, because they build a general strength, but I've got to be able to transform that into application.
Yeah.
And this is my worry sometimes, is that a method becomes the go-to, and we throw all different things out in chasing that. And we then 2 or 3 years down the line, we realize, oh, maybe that wasn't such a good idea.
Yeah.
And it's effectively integrating tools. What I like here, Ralph, with what you've got is, I think traditionally a lot of the rotational challenges have been equipment wise. We just haven't had the tools to be able to do them. So if you think now, I can remember a time before bands, believe it or not. Bands allowed us to do a lot of different things than traditional, barbells and dumbbells allowed. We've had medicine balls, but we've had far less range of tools for rotational work as we have had for the traditional sagittal work, which has taken us down a sagittal emphasis. And I think this balancing up this is important.
The funny thing is that you refer to it is that thousands of years before started strength and conditioning, which is not that old actually, right? Compared to human training, right? Because humans always did they train? No, they had to be fit to survive. So they of course did 20,000, 30,000 steps a day because they were hunters and gatherers, right? So that they had to move, right? They had no pavement. They had no flat grounds. They had to move in 3-dimensional to get to some point because it was totally different. Like it's like trail running. You never run straight if you're on a trail, right? Where there are rocks and stuff like that. That's actually human motion. And when we even go further, like where do we come from, right? In evolution, we gave up a lot of things to be upright, to be able to walk on 2 legs. But what comes with walking off 2 legs? It comes the alternation, left foot, right foot stand, left foot, right foot stand, that changes everything. So, and every athlete does that because we have to run, we have to move. And then you train in these bilateral stances that build strength, but not movement quality and movement efficiency. So you have to stack that on. If we talk about skill stacking, we have to stack that on the movement that builds strength, right? And probably there are different ways. I always say there has to be something that adds up to what you do. And for me, the best athlete is the one who adds the most components to their ability, because they can always fall back on something. If something goes haywire, if you don't have a plan B, C, D, right, intuitively, you will fail. But if you're prepared for anything that comes your way, you have that solution. And that is training in as many aspects as possible. And that's what I like about the R.A.M.P protocol. You can put all that in. You can
put anything in.
Right.
Absolutely.
You can put anything in that has a long-term effect. And it only takes these 10 minutes probably to get into it, right?
And the key, as I mentioned earlier, the effects are accumulative. You don't do one warm-up and that's it. You keep adding, you keep reinforcing, and then you look back 6 weeks, 6 months, and you say, oh my gosh, that's made a difference. And those were my experiences in those coaching scenarios, was seeing how people were getting good, but we hadn't really had to increase their training dose. It simply was restructuring what they did in warm-up and I hope cleverly integrating different things and progressing various aspects of it so that it becomes a training whole. And I think we're talking about exactly the same thing here.
The interesting thing at this point is that coaches who are now starting to realize that not just the value in the structure that's coming through with R.A.M.P, but you can even periodize, and you can even
Yes.
play with the methodology to enable long-term development. And Ralph, when you were talking about three-dimensional movement, it's pretty clear now as well that no matter what aspect of life, but especially in the context of sport, the contribution of three-dimensional movement and rotational forces is very, very high, not just for also performance, but injury prevention. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about what does three-dimensional movement look like within a warm-up? How does that fit within the R.A.M.P structure?
Well, like Ian said, first of all, we didn't have the tools actually to do something like that. It's very easy to develop a tool, because what was the first tool a human ever took to as a tool in his hands? It was a stick. And that's something that is very natural to us to grip and to swing. And if you look at all the sports equipment that is out there, it is modeled after the stick. What is a tennis racket? It's a stick with a racket head. What is a golf club? It's a stick with a golf head, right? So martial arts, everything you hit with is a sword or whatever, right? It's modeled after a stick. So that's what we naturally grip. But in especially in strength and conditioning, it looks different, and you grip it differently. So you force yourself into positions that are not really natural to what we actually do. And so I think if we put it into a warm-up, it's very easy that because we go through natural progressions. We go, what is the thing that accelerates us? It's the hip. Because every genetic energy we generate from comes from the ground up, because that's the only place where we can push off from. It's the ground, because we are upright. We are a species who walk on 2 feet. We're the only species actually that walks on 2 feet and has 2 hands. So everything comes up from the ground. And where do we accelerate it? Through the hip movement. Look at the golfer, look at the discus thrower. I was talking to Robert Harting at one time, 4-time world champion in discus throw. He talks about the force he generates when he releases the discus. The discus is 2 kilos. It doesn't sound much. In a gym, you don't have anything that is 2 kilos, right? It goes 5 kilos up. The 2 kilo in the moment of release of a guy who throws at 70 meters is above 700 Newton meters. So he multiplies the discus, the weight of the discus, by 35 through rotation. So you don't need much weight if you go into rotational patterns, because the potentiation of it through range of motion, through velocity, through acceleration is enormously. The 400-pound barbell always stays the 400 pounds. Right? Or either you throw it up and you have to catch it or something like that, which is not really healthy. But in the throwing motions or the swinging motions, we tend to get the people into it. It becomes something totally different. So we measured 1 kilo becoming 18 kilos. If you have that in both hands, if you have to withstand forces of 36 kilos. So it's something that you accelerate and you have to take care of, so you have to withstand these forces, and that's where the training is. That builds the structural stability, that's built the awareness and the cognitive part of what you are doing. And this is immensely, and that is very easily integrated into the warm-up, because they are really easy movements. What is the most easy movement you do in rotation? You swing your arms while running. But what does that do? You start to rotate, right? So you have to withstand these forces of rotation to go straight. So it's very easy. You take something in your hand, you start walking motions, right? And then you potentiate it. And you keep going. And so it's actually really easy to implement it when you know what you're doing and have the right tools.
Yeah. And from someone who has experienced a full R.A.M.P warm-up with these in my hands and doing the protocol, I can honestly say that from a raise perspective, I'm near max at times. From an activation perspective, I'm stimulating muscle. If I am going through all the ranges of motion that my shoulder, my torso, my legs can produce, I am mobilizing. But as you were saying, Ralph, as well, that that there is the potential to really be quite explosive as well, and I think that I feel that I'm able to cover all bases with the structure from going through R.A.M.P. And I actually did it before my race in Chicago, and what it enabled me to do was to feel that no matter what situation I was in, I was then able to overcome the challenge or be able to solve the problem physically. I was able to really kind of feel prepared coming into that race. So I think at this moment in time, what I'd like coaches to kind of start to do is to take the concepts that what we've discussed, but now begin to bring it into the sort of HYROX world, should we say. So I suppose, Ralph, could you maybe, speaking of decoding, could you maybe just talk a little bit more about some of the movements that we're seeing in HYROX? How does three-dimensional movement specifically contribute towards that performance, and how does that relate to the R.A.M.P. warm-up?
Well, first of all, like we already talked about running. Running is based on rotational forces, and if you are really a runner, well, we talk about like 4 stages of moving forward as a human. Like we're walkers, right? Then we maybe are joggers, and then we become runners, and then we become really good runners, right? So that's a stage, and that's always a progression in it. And like I said, to control the rotational forces in running and to utilize them to forward propulsion is quite an achievement. So there is already an aspect of a lot of rotational forces, and you really benefit from that. And I really think if you implement it into your warm-ups, it will benefit your running, because the whole stability, the whole efficiency changes. And we're always talking about neuromuscular things, but we never talk, or seldomly talk. It's getting more and more about fascia. And the fascial thing is, it's of course part of our elastic recoil system, because it's like a 3D spider web that combines it's like your compression wear, right? So it combines everything: joints, muscles, tendons, ligaments, organs. So it binds everything together. It's a dynamic living tissue, and it is something that, especially in the moments you refer to in rugby, for instance, and change of directions, react. Sometimes, if it's not consciously done, because you get tackled probably from the side and you haven't seen it, the fascia reacts before the muscle reacts. So it's our stability aspect, right? Especially around the spine, which is one of our main accelerators in force generation. So the fascia reacts first. And this is something what we train with, and this, of course, something implements right into HYROX, into your running style. It implements your burpee broad jumps, because you have to land and you have to get up again and you have to jump again. So jumping is a lot of elastic recoil. You know that better than anybody else, right? Speed is all based on elastic recoil. Even something like the ski erg, the moment when you stretch and shorten, because your upper body and you move downwards while the arms probably still go upwards, has the stretch shortening cycle. So the first effect is not muscular, it's from elastic. So it makes you more efficient in your movement. What brings that? You will be better runner afterwards, because you saved energy. Same thing with the wall ball. I see so many people like squat down to just enough height that they don't get penalized. But if you really go down, you have this effect. You go down and it's like a spring, because all your muscle, all your tendons, all your fascia is stretched from the ankles over your knees to the hips. So there is an upward movement. So if you train that, there is this effect through fascia, and fascia is trained by rotational forces. And what brings stability, for instance, to the wall balls is, of course, that you're in a position that you can react. If you throw it up and it comes a little bit to the side, what is it? There's rotation force, you have to bring it back, right? So there's so much effect you can have on your HYROX through rotation force. And that's how we decoded it. And we thought we have to bring that into the warm-up, because no HYROX athlete will give us their main training, which is mostly high volume, right? And after that, they're totally devastating. They're totally exhausted. You can't do anything that is skillful. So when we saw your structure, we thought, this is genius. We have to bring that to HYROX, because this gives us the opportunity to get everything in that is HYROX missing, but will make HYROX a better sport and HYROX athletes better athletes. They will have less injuries because they're better prepared. And think about that. HYROX getting bigger and bigger. You saw that in Cologne, right?
That's
How
right.
big it is. So the running track really gets crowded. Can you run straight if you're a faster runner than others? Probably not. So you have to change directions. Then you have to get in and out of these movements stations. There are some turns that are 180 degrees. So there's a huge effect on rotation on that, right? Farmer's carry. If you're not really stable, it really gets you into rotational force and really tires you out. We've seen that World Championship, right, with Hunter McIntyre. He was so tired that this guy had to drop it 4 times. Unbelievable. So I think there's a huge benefit for everybody to train that way, but it's a mindset change. And change is always, we talked about that before.
Yes, it's challenging.
It's challenging. You have done that with rugby. We now try to get something into HYROX, which is highly beneficial, I guess. And I truly believe that it is. But of course, we have to make people understand. That's why we're here to talk about it today, right? Because we can learn from your experience. And I'm really, because you were at Cologne and you saw what is going on. You looked at the warm-up, actually, and we met there.
Yes,
and would really like to get your perspective on what you saw there.
It was the huge variation, I think, and that is typical. That's not surprising. So when you're watching individuals, they're taking ideas, but there's a lack of structure to them. So if you looked individually at what some were doing, you say, that's good. But there wasn't the logical, progressive structure that the ramp warm-up would give. So it's one of these, okay, where should I start? And the key here, what you've talked about to an extent, is the competition warm-up and the training warm-up are going to be different. Okay, the training warm-up is where we take a longer-term approach. For the competition warm-up, it is optimal preparation. And the key there is very much balancing what I'll call fitness with fatigue. So whenever you do an activity, it has 2 confounding impacts. It has the potential to improve performance, which is the fitness side of it, but it comes with fatigue. So the key is to have as much of the push up and as little of the push down as you can. You can. So whilst in the longer term training ones, we're not so concerned about that, because we're looking, this is a long-term training process. With competition, we need to make sure that we are optimally prepared for the activity, but we haven't got undue fatigue. And this is my worry with some of the ways that strength and conditioning research, for example, is happening. It's looking at what I'll call hyper potentiation, post-activation potentiation, where it's using supramaximal activities to potentiate. But the danger in that is, what's the fatiguing element? Maybe not immediate, but the accumulative fatigue. And it's always that balance. So I think with a structure such as the ramp warm-up and some of the activities that you're talking about, people can come up with a well-structured warm-up which they can modify after every competition. So they can say, that prepared me well for these activities. I didn't feel as well prepared for this one. How can I modify? And if you've got notes, each warm-up, each event is potentially a learning experience then. You can say, right, I felt a little underprepared. I need to do a little bit more. What happened to a lot of people, especially with the enthusiasm and the excitement, I'm over-prepared. They start very well, but then they start to fade, which is just as much a problem as under-preparation.
I think from my experiences operating as a participant, but also as an observer, the warm-up environment in HYROX tends to be quite chaotic. And what I mean by that is that there is a limited amount of stations, limited amount of room that athletes can operate in. And what tends to happen is that there's a scattergun approach towards what they want to do. They have an idea of what they want to do. They might want to replicate what they do in their training environment, but ultimately what tends to happen is that they can't, because they are restricted to the constraints of the environment. So there is that scattergun approach, and I think in the heat of the moment, with the minutes, ticking by, and we're getting closer and closer to that start gun, what's happening is athletes, whether they are a singles athlete or a doubles athlete, there is, that's free. I'm going to jump on that and I'm going to nail it, because that's going to make me feel race ready. It might be that there's a bit of space on the side. I might do some stretching, but it's very kind of, I'll do a bit of this, I'll do a bit of that. Oh, that looks good, I might do that. I've never done it before, but I'll try that one. And then, they're practicing transitions over there. I asked my doubles partner, should we do that? So there is this kind of, I'm going to try it in the moment. And what this does is we're now bringing to light that the structure can provide a pre-planned protocol that can be adapted, modified, individualized, that allows that individual or doubles to perform well.
I'd agree with you totally. And I think the important thing that you said there, don't try to replicate the training. There's probably, and again, I'm not experienced in this, so I could be wrong. There are going to be differences at each warm-up, but there will be similarities. You're not going to have, there are going to be, it's going to be limited in space, going to be limited in equipment availability. Yeah. You've got to almost plan for that. You've got to say, right, I'm going to raise through this. These are going to be my key mobilization. Sometimes you have to take stuff with you to prepare. You can't necessarily plan on certain availability. Potentiation, I'm going to try and work on this. There may have to be a little bit of variation, but as you said, Ralph's doing that, maybe I should try that. He's good. Oh, yeah. That's what we need to avoid. Is if I see Ralph doing it today, I don't copy it now. I try it out in training. Yeah. I see if it brings benefits, and if it does, I incorporate it. If it doesn't, I'll leave it go. Because ironically, it could be the first time Ralph's ever tried that, and there's suddenly contagion. And
and I think there's this huge difference, like we pointed out, between preparing for a race and preparing to train. The training part leaves us so many more options, because first of all, we are fresh and we know, right? So the whole pathway, the neural pathway, the muscular pathway, everything is fresh. It's so we can really put a stimulus on. And like you were talking about, that there is no boundary between the preparation and the main training. So it's fluently integrated into it. So you don't even feel when you get into the main part of the training, then it's probably best. That's what I'm taking with me.
That was always it was different when I was working with the rugby team, because I would have the warm-up and they would then pass on to the
other coaches,
team coaches. Yeah. But when I was doing the whole session, the whole conditioning session, I always used to ask my athletes, did you know when the warm-up finished? And quite often they would say, has it? I don't know. That to me was a good session, because that meant that everything flowed together. But even with the team coaches, especially when I was working with the football academy, I would ask them, what's your focus today? and they would say, "Oh, we're working on defensive patterns." I could manipulate the potentiation phase to work on the movements that contributed to defense, to offense, and so on. So even there, that integrated approach can work.
Yeah, and I think especially in HYROX, when you think about training, and the facility where you train should be a safe space where you feel comfortable. You don't have any anxiety. You know what you're getting to. You're probably training all with the same people. So there you can really try things out. And they probably would not look awkward upon you when you're not that fluent in the first thing. When you try something to become a better athlete in the long term, it's actually I would say, well, you're very smart that you try that. But when I go to a race, there's this noise, there's this, everything is going on. You want to be better than the last time. There's this kind of anxiety. There's this arousement where you have to control. So actually, I think a preparation for the event sometimes it's of course you should potentiate before that, especially with the activation and the mobilization, is something that
Absolutely
brings you down, brings you into the moment, brings you to something that is a pre-start phase where you're control yourself. You're in control of yourself.
Yes. There's undoubtedly a psychological element to preparation.
Yeah.
And I've been in team sport environments where we've been under-aroused, but I've also been in loads of team sports environments where we've been over-aroused.
Yeah.
And that over-arousal has caused so many problems.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? Because I think this is also a very, very important point. What that looks like in team sports, we could go into some depth about, the changing rooms and getting hyped, and then how that then explosion of testosterone and excitement on the pitch will lead to probably a breakdown in skills or a breakdown in following the rules, should we say. In the context of HYROX, the first task that an athlete has to go through is that 1 kilometer run going into the ski erg. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're a novice athlete or whether you're an elite 15 athlete. If you're under aroused, the chances are you may not necessarily go into that first run or that first station hitting the right mark or being on the front foot of your race plan. If you're over aroused, you may be over pacing, getting excited, realizing that there's maybe 5 or 6 other athletes in front of you. Oh, I should stay with them, but they're running 10 to 20 seconds per kilometer quicker than what you should be. With a warm-up, drawing on Ralph's point, I think that there is an element of control to the first part of that warm-up where you're bringing yourself back in and you're thinking about your processes, you're thinking about raise, activate, mobilizing in a controlled manner that is right for you. And then that potentiation, and we've expanded on that quite a lot regarding skill development, movement development, but that how that's performed should be getting the athlete to a point where they are at their optimal arousal state, and that will only come from experience.
It will.
They won't know exactly from their first race how aroused they should be, but over time they'll learn this is how I should feel in that Red Bull start tunnel when the music's playing, the countdown's on.
And there's actually this very fascinating psychology method or state of being, which is called the state of flow. And the state of flow is something where you're at your optimal state of performance. So it's something that is very interesting, actually, that it can be measured in hertz, like we know what the state of flow is, but it can be triggered. And the funny thing is that these top athletes in the 4 premier sports in the USA now try to get into the state of flow. And with, like I said, I was a broadcaster, right? So there was in broadcasting this term of, he is in a flow when Stephen Curry hits like 10 3-pointers in a row. He can't miss. So he is in this state. And how do they get people to do that? It's not in linear movements. It's in rotational patterns.
Interesting.
It's in connection from mind and body. They start to juggle and stuff like that. So it's a very cognitive thing, but it has a huge effect on the physiological part. And that's exactly where we want to get people to, right? Get back to yourself, find your state of flow, and then explode. And that's really, really interesting. What I really found interesting is that they say it is totally alternating movements. It's totally rotational. They don't do any sagittal things anymore in most of these sports in preparation. It's very, very interesting. So we have to get deeper into that. And I think this is something where we really can lead HYROX athletes to something new, because I think the beauty of HYROX is that it's such a new sport. We don't know much about what you need to be the best athlete. Of course, we know you have to be a good runner. You have to be a runner who can perform under fatigue. You have to be able to work under fatigue quite a bit. But what do you need to work under fatigue? We don't really know. But like I said before, if you have a plan B or plan C and you have always a fallback mode where you're so sure of yourself, you will find a way to do that. And I think we have to get them as many skills and athletic abilities as possible. And at the moment, I see that everybody is just doing as much volume as possible. But that only leads to a certain amount of what you can do, what a human can do. Some can do more than others.
And I think what will happen over time is we will start to integrate the knowledge that comes from different sports.
Different sports, yes.
That's natural with a new sport,
yes,
isn't it? There may not be a huge amount of HYROX research published at the moment.
No, it's
but do we know how to get strong? We probably do. Do we know in endurance? Yes, there are sports that specialize in that. The key will be not make the mistake of trying to copy.
Yes.
But bring in, right, these are the adaptations we need. What methods do we have that will achieve those adaptations? And it goes back to what I said with that reverse engineering. The big mistake I think we make with speed is we presume if we train like a track athlete, we will be effective speed in whatever sport. It has some benefits without a doubt, and I still do, and always will do some track type work, but we also need to address those other processes. And I can imagine that with good partnerships, and as the HYROX research itself starts to be generated, we'll learn a huge amount, and our methods will evolve.
Yeah, it's like I did the decathlon later, so this is actually the HYROX off track, right? The way to put so many different movement patterns, and that's the I think the really challenging part of HYROX. You have these different movement patterns, and you have to combine that with running, which is always something like a repetitive things. Actually, if you're really good at it, it should be your fallback where you can relax somehow. It's still running a good speed, but that is about totally movement control. This is using your elastic recall, being a really good technical runner, and then going into these different motions of movement and HYROX. And if you're a really well-trained athlete in all facets of athletic ability, you will have a great chance to be effective and to be successful.
I think what those skill patterns bring you is efficiency.
Yes.
Everything is done with that little bit less energy requirements, which aggregates, and ultimately your performances improve.
Yeah.
At this point, I think it's very important for coaches listening to recognize that if an athlete that they're working with is consistently using R.A.M.P, consistently applying the principles that we've spoken about today, they will develop resilience when it comes to their movement efficiency. They will develop the skill necessary to be successful in the sport. So there is that long-term athlete development to it. As we're coming towards the end, I wanted to give both of you now an opportunity to give coaches one critical learning message that you both feel is super important for them to walk away with. So, Ralph, if I come to you first, what is your one critical message?
Very good question. It's always tough to nail it down to one, right, Ian?
Oh, yes.
Because we touch so many aspects of it. I would say to all the coaches, stay curious, stay open to new things, because we all don't know everything. Someone like someone told me a long time ago, said we have to know that we don't know, right? So keep learning, because we will get better in what we do, especially in a sport that new. We take parts from other sports at the moment. We take the endurance part and say, okay, we do that. Then we take the technical part, but how do we bring that all together? And I think there could be something that brings it all together and has a huge effect. I think R.A.M.P could be something like that, because it will have an effect, because we can try out something new.
Yes.
We don't risk something that we miss later, because we have still our main training, and it's only 10 minutes. But like you said before, 10 minutes every day,
It multiplies.
it adds up at least to an hour if you train 6 times a week as a pro, as a very good athlete. If you only train 3 times a day, it's still 30 minutes. And I think R.A.M.P has even a chance to go even deeper, because it's only 10 minutes. I could do that just as a small piece during my daily routine. I think, why don't we R.A.M.P our day? A day is something where we have to perform in as a father, as in our job, as a mother, like whatever, right? That's a performance. So when we get up every morning, why don't we R.A.M.P our day? How do you like that, Ian? I think it's a very interesting point, isn't it?
It is. I think to me, and this refers probably to the R.A.M.P warm-up, is just see it as an opportunity to get better.
Yes.
In doing that, be creative. There are no restrictions. There are no have-to-dos.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's looking at the needs of the individual, which relate to their current capabilities, their activities, their goals, and then structure various activities around that. And be comfortable that we'll make mistakes. We're our own lab. If we are meticulous in the records that we keep, tried this, didn't like it, okay, won't use it. Tried this, that may have worked. Let's have a look at. Do you know, we're keeping records, we're looking at what's working, what isn't working, and slowly our structures will evolve.
Very good. We all know what it takes, or what the standard is, to create a world record in the sport of HYROX. Now I believe we have a world record standard for a warm-up. That's what I think. My take-home message, I think, to coaches would be that they now have the knowledge, or they will, going through this process, have the knowledge of how to create a R.A.M.P to train, and also an opportunity for a R.A.M.P to race. With that responsibility, with that knowledge comes a responsibility, and I think that it's for them to pass on, and for them to really teach others, and to make sure that they are improving the communities around them. So that would be my message to them. By the end of this process, have that responsibility to really pass it on. We are now out of time, so Ian, Ralph, thank you very much for your contributions today. It will go a long way, I'm sure, and I welcome the coaches to really take on this opportunity and dive deep into the world of R.A.M.P further.
No,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.